So in this video, I want to discuss 4 pervasive myths about posture, pain, and some of the flawed ways that trainers try to fix it. No association between so-called text neck, where you tilt your head down to look at your phone, and neck pain in 150 young adults. Yet a lot of the internet seems to be really worried about this.
What the f? But you don't have to just take my word for it. Once again, join me and do a little experiment with your own body. Contrary to popular belief, science does not beat reason. Reason beats science. Hold your guttural reaction. You're really not supposed to declaw your cats. Hang in there. This is going to make sense in a moment. Today we're going to be talking about my response, or I'm going to be giving a response to Jeff Nippards' video about posture and why he thinks you should not care about posture. Look, I'm just going to warn you guys in advance. When this video came out and I saw this, I got super triggered. I have a lot of respect for Jeff Nippard. I don't know a whole lot about the Dr. Spinelli guy that he's interviewing and everything like that, but you know, he's a practicing doctor, probably very smart. I think this video absolutely sucks. I think that this video is devoid of critical thinking. Hey, Future Antonio here. I talk too much, and this video was supposed to be like 30 minutes, but it ended up being 2 hours. Kind of think a lot of people might actually enjoy some of the information that we get into, especially in the second half of this video. So to sweeten the deal, I've added little watermarks of little letters across the entire video, and if you accumulate these little letters, if you write them all down, it's going to be a promo code that you can use for my website and get a 15% discount for my online store. I don't know how long I'm going to be keeping this promo code, but let's just see how it goes. If anybody watches it and you accumulate all the different letters, then use them and get 15% on my website. But first, let me explain why I am so triggered. You know, critical fitness is supposed to be about exactly that. It's the fitness that you need. It's the fitness that you need for your life. It's the fitness that you need for your health span. I'd be lying if I didn't bring up the fact that when you think of critical and critical fitness, you might associate it with terms like, for example, critical thinking. That is absolutely part of it. I love the practice of critical thinking, and I love building and maintaining a critical thinking skill set, which is exactly what that is. Critical thinking is not something you're born with. It is a skill that you have to develop and maintain. And the fitness and health community is almost completely devoid of critical thinking. This is how you get so much bullshit of anything from Gwyneth Paltrow products all the way to whatever crazy supplement somebody's coming out with, toxins and fighting toxins. And I'll be honest, it can go all the way up to the quote-unquote evidence-based people. I think the term evidence-based is kind of an abused term. It's kind of becoming like gourmet or like organic or anything like that, where there's just no discipline behind the use of the word. So you get some people that use the term evidence-based, I don't think are really thinking critically about the stuff that they're saying or the ideas that they're presenting. And I would say that this video is like the perfect example of exactly what I'm talking about. This is a video that has some research behind it. It has a medical professional behind it. But as far as I am concerned, this video is absolutely just devoid of critical thinking and just basic reasoning really altogether. And I don't want you to think that I'm presenting myself as some messiah of critical thinking or anything like that. And actually, it's the exact opposite. Basically, how this video is going to work is I'm going to do a breakdown of this video point for point as it goes by. Ultimately, what I want from you is I want you to check my logic. I want you to hear what I'm saying, and I want you to consider what I'm saying, and you know, leave a comment, let me know what you think. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Look, I mean, this video is a perfect example of why I always tell people never turn off your brain. It does not matter if you're talking to your doctor. It doesn't matter if you're watching a video from an influencer or an educator that you respect. It doesn't matter if you're listening to me. Never turn off your brain, especially when it comes to your body. Because at the end of the day, you are the one who suffers the consequences. I can give you a perfect example from my own life. When I got a herniated disc, back in high school, the doctor told me that there was really nothing I could do and that I was just going to be in pain for the rest of my life. That doctor doomed me because I believed him. I believed that there was nothing I could do about my pain. I was a kid. I didn't have any other sources. I wasn't thinking critically. And I was like, yeah, I guess this is just my life. I'm just going to be in pain. And guess what happened? I was in pain, and my pain got worse and worse and worse. And that pain translated into other symptoms throughout my body because I developed bad movement patterns that just altered the way I moved, and I compensating in different ways and basically caused a chain reaction that caused all kinds of different problems throughout my body because I just kept pushing through the pain. And I kept pushing through the pain I thought I needed to because a doctor told me that that's how life was. I experienced this sensation in my back that was so crazy, it felt like I was being tasered. Laid in my dorm bedroom, and just cried my eyes out because I thought that like this was the rest of my life. I thought that my life was just going to be agonizing pain. This is what I'm talking about when I say never let anybody do the thinking for you. You use anybody, you use me, you use Jeff, you use your doctor, use them as a resource, but remember that when they are wrong, you are the one who pays the consequences. Like I've said in previous videos, I'm a lot more interested in giving people the tools that they need to be able to navigate the health and fitness world than just telling you what to think. So try and look at this video like this. Look at this video that I'm giving to you as more of like my thought process and how I analyze information, and see if this can relate to you in any situations that you encounter in your life. So without further ado, let's get into this video.
Posture looks better to you, the left or the right? Well, if you've watched any YouTube videos on posture, you'd most likely say the right. And if you had to give the guy on the left any advice, you might say he should pull his shoulders back and lift his chest up. And then you might suggest that he add in some daily doorway pec stretches or some chin tucks to fix his text neck and plenty of face pulls to get those shoulders back. And while some of this might make sense in some situations, this is one of those topics where the devil is in the details. So in this video, I want to discuss 4 pervasive myths about posture, pain, and some of the flawed ways that trainers try to fix it.
Posture is essentially just positions. But then when we start to add on this delineation of good and bad, that's really morality.
Okay, so this is, I think, one of the first things that immediately triggered the hell out of me. This is a major pet peeve I have when we're talking about critical thinking and just people making an argument or a conversation in general. It's blowing up a concept or watering it down to the point where it is no longer functional. In this case, he says that posture is just positions. Technically, that is true. If you Google the word posture, the first thing you'll see is just positions. But there's really no utilitarian value in a term like that just says position. Let me give you an example. Let's say we have a rocket and the rocket is in position. It should be safe to say that when you say the rocket is in position, that the rocket is pointing up to the sky. It sure would be pretty stupid if I was working for SpaceX and somebody said, hey, is the rocket in position? And I look at the rocket and the rocket is upside down facing into the earth. And I said, yeah, the rocket is in position. Would that technically be true? Sure, it would technically be true that it is in position. Just like good posture and bad posture are technically positioned. There's really no utilitarian value in watering down a concept when you're just saying, oh, it's just, you can do whatever. So essentially the argument that Dr. Spinelli is making is that posture is just this arbitrary thing that was invented by, it's just another way for rich people or higher class people to differentiate themselves from poor people. And that it's completely arbitrary. It has no connection to reality or physics or anything like that. No physiological benefits whatsoever. Now, obviously that feels very intuitive, right? Because classism is real, and we definitely do associate posture with class and, people of higher class. And also, yeah, rich people and royalty have come up with all kinds of weird cockamamie different things that are just a way of them differentiating themselves from their fellow Homo sapiens. You can say the invention of the lawn, of powdered wigs, Gucci bags, and all kinds of stupid stuff. There's all kinds of weird, stupid things that rich people come up with to just make themselves feel better than their fellow Homo sapien. Now, I'll tell you this. I don't think that it is just classism. It's multifactorial. I think there are a bunch of different things that go into it. But I think that classism is a component. So in one sense, I don't necessarily have a problem with what he's saying. But I would like to point out that what he's saying is a little bit shallow. Let me explain. Let's just say that he is correct, that posture comes entirely from classism. Well, could you come up with a better explanation that involves classism other than just one day rich people randomly decided to stand up straight? Well, I think you actually can. It's pretty simple, really. Because of how inefficient it was to grow plants and everything like that, the extreme majority of Homo sapiens over the course of our thousands and thousands of years of history have worked in hard labor out in the fields, doing what we would call back-breaking work. Basically, the idea being that you are bent over in the fields, cutting wheat. Most people spent most of their time bent over and working in the fields. Your body exists in a perpetual state of use it or lose it. I like to tell people this: you assume, your body resumes, meaning that if you assume a position long enough for various different reasons, your body will resume that position. The muscles on the inside of your body are going to get tighter and stronger, and the muscles in your back and your posterior chain will get weaker and more elongated. So imagine that you are a laborer, that you are out in the field 10,000 years ago. You look around and you look at all the people like you who are outside in the field, and over the course of decades or so of working on, in agriculture, they all look just like you. They all have been bent over their whole lives, and so they all have bent over backs. Then you look over at your overlord, the person on the horse or whoever in whatever situation you want, and he hasn't been doing that his entire life. And so he hasn't responded to the same stressor that you have. He hasn't been bent over his entire life, and so his body is a little bit more extended. His back is a little bit more extended. So you can imagine a situation where you can easily look around and see these people have spent their entire lives out in the field, and this person has not. And so you can very easily develop this kind of classism where you go, okay, that person clearly inherited a flock of sheep or whatever ancient thing they inherited, and they tell other people what to do. Meanwhile, that person is bent over because they're the person who's getting told what to do. Again, I don't think that classism is the biggest factor when we decide what is good and bad posture. I think there's a lot of different things. I think there's a better mechanism that would fuel this classism other than just it's an arbitrary thing that rich people came up with one day.
From a standpoint of efficiency, if you're sitting in a chair with a backrest, sitting up nice and upright is actually a less mechanically advantageous position to be in because it does take more energetic effect to maintain that. In contrast,
so once again, I think that this is somewhat shallow thinking. I'm not saying that he is shallow, but this thought process that he's presenting, I think, is very shallow. And really what it comes down to is, it comes down to a common misconception about efficiency. Efficiency is a relative concept. Technically, once again, yes, he is correct. In a short duration, it is more efficient to, for whatever reason, lean back into your chair, into slouch or whatever. If your muscles in the back are getting tired from holding your shoulders, then technically, yes. In the short duration, it would be more efficient to just relax your body. But if we lived our lives based solely off of short-term efficiencies, we would never go for runs. We would never go to the gym. We would really never do anything to invest in our bodies in the future. And that's exactly, I think, what one of the biggest problems with this mentality is. Never think about your body like it's a paycheck. Think about your body like it's a 401k, or vice versa, like it's credit card debt. Meaning that you will never escape the compound effect. If you think short term, if you're thinking paycheck to paycheck, if you're thinking, oh, I want to look good by the summer, I want to be able to lift this much by this much, you're thinking paycheck to paycheck. And in this case, he's thinking literally just like 1K term paychecks. What he's talking about here is that, yeah, if you have bad posture and you try to sit with good posture, it will be exhausting. There's no question about it, because those muscles are weak. The muscles in your posterior chain are weak. When I first set out to fix my posture years and years ago, I experienced exactly what he's referring to. The constantly reminding myself to fix my posture, to constantly arch my back, to extend my thoracic spine and roll my shoulders back. I was constantly having to remind myself, and it was exhausting. These days, I don't have to think about it at all because I invested the time in my body back then, years ago, and now my muscles are stronger, they have more stamina, and I can just hold that position all day. I don't even really think about it. And that's really the difference between somebody with good posture and bad posture.
Now, of course, no one's saying that we should all slouch as much as possible, but the idea is to simply make an effort to vary your body positions throughout the day.
There's a common saying that's utilized in this evidence-based physio crowd that your next posture is your best posture. And it's just that by the nature of moving between them, you're going to get benefit. One benefit that comes with slouching is actually that we get more discal fluid shift. And so if you were to maintain this nice upright posture for a very long duration of time, your discs actually don't get a lot of fluid shifted to them. And so when you go into that more slouch position, because of the change in gradient of pressure, we have some pressure move from the front to the back, and that changes the circulating chemicals that allow for better healing, better maintenance of homeostasis, etc. So there's a lot of benefit that comes from just these natural little changes that you do.
So, obviously, I agree with this. I agree that, we are not trees. We are not oysters. We are mammals, and we are designed to move. We are designed probably for running long distances. We are designed for adaptability, but we are designed to be always moving. So, obviously, I agree that it's better to move. But once again, as you'll see, I'm probably going to be saying this a lot. I think that this is a very shallow argument. Moving your body makes more sense than being stagnant. So I would argue, get up and move. I mean, I don't think that they would even disagree with me on this. It is far more beneficial to just get up and move, stretch your body, walk around a little bit, maybe every half an hour or so. Just get up, stand up, move. If you have the opportunity to get a standing desk, use a standing desk, stand on one leg, do some balances, change things up. So what would be the better, more beneficial version of what he's saying? Well, if you think a little bit deeper, you should probably just move your body and don't sacrifice your ability to fight gravity over a prolonged period of time just because you need to move a little bit in your chair. I'm telling you, the simplest thing, like standing on one leg, if you have a standing desk and you're typing, if you have the opportunity to just get a standing desk and stand on one foot or balance yourself on one foot, I really encourage people that if you have to be in one spot, balancing yourself on one foot is almost the equivalent to moving because of the amount of balance and coordination that your body has to use in order to just stand on one foot over a prolonged period of time.
If you go into an important job interview, you don't want to be slouching because that speaks volumes more than anything you're going to actually talk out of your mouth. Walking into a room with your chest out, your chin up, that can all impact the way that people read you and interact with you. So posture gets more significant when we talk about things like that. But as far as correlating a good upright posture versus a bad slouching posture, we haven't really seen that in the evidence.
This idea kind of circles back to classism, right? You go for a job interview or you want to impress, somebody, so you hold good posture. Well, again, I think this is pretty shallow because you just got to think a little bit deeper and a little bit harder. Wouldn't it be easier to hold a good posture for that interview or for that date if you just did it all the time? I mean, for most people who have rounded shoulders, if you're watching this video and you have rounded shoulders, just for the duration of this video, see if you can roll your shoulders back. See if you can extend your thoracic spine for this entire video. Just see if you can do it. For most people, if you struggle with bad posture, holding it for 5-10 minutes is going to be very difficult and you're probably going to look very uncomfortable. Now, every now and then I'll get a group of people and I'll try and, coach them on how to fix their posture, and most of them look very uncomfortable. Their face starts to get red and there's because they're focusing. They're basically trying to train their body to do something that they almost never practice doing. Do you really want to be in a date and just be like, yeah, I totally do that. Yeah, absolutely. Because you can't pay attention to what a person is saying or anything like that because you're just focusing on your back. Doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. On one side, they're saying, yeah, if you hold this position for a long period of time, you're going to get exhausted. But then they're saying, don't worry, you can just casually turn on good posture. And of course, the longer you go without fighting bad posture, the more flexed your shoulders become, the more difficult it gets, right? It's easier to fix your posture when you're in your 20s than it is in your 30s. And it's easier to fix your posture in your 30s than it is in your 40s, and so on and so forth. So once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I would say I think it's a very, very shallow argument.
And that brings me to myth number 2, which is that fixing your posture will fix your pain. But this common idea has been refuted by a mountain of scientific evidence over the last few decades. And I think that—
So this is where I'm going to talk a lot about this, okay? So there's a bunch of different things I need to talk about here. He's literally stating that there is, quote unquote, a mountain of evidence against the correlation of posture and pain. Now, he's only posting 8 sources. I've definitely seen other sources and things like that that would agree with his thesis here. But I think there's something even deeper going on here, which is that across the board, both the general public and science enthusiasts have this idea that lack of evidence of something is evidence. That is not how that works. Okay, so in this case, he's presenting 8 different studies that could not find correlations between posture and pain. That does not prove anything. Not having evidence quite literally proves nothing. That's the point. The reason is because you cannot prove an unquantifiable negative. That's just not logically cohesive. Let me give you an example. So something that you probably hear these days would be the healthy at any size movement. Now, if you're not plugged into the Fat Logic echo chamber, most people, your immediate thought process when you hear that is, any size? Really, any size. There is no size in which it is no longer healthy. That's an unquantifiable negative. In this case, he's saying that there is no posture correlation with pain? None whatsoever. So there is no degree of bad posture in which your body is compromised, in which you are no longer effectively fighting gravity. This is not good science. And this is kind of the difference between hard science and soft science. When we talk about hard sciences and soft sciences are typically going to be like the older ones, physics, biology, astronomy, things that we've been studying for hundreds or thousands of years. They've essentially isolated enough variables that they can actually start to take measurements and predict outcomes. We are nowhere near that in the fitness, muscular development field at all. There are very few situations in which the number of variables have been cut down to the point where you can measure and predict an outcome. But we are super nowhere near close when it comes to pain. Pain is a very, very weird thing. So you say you have research that shows that there is no correlation between pain and bad posture. Well, I can actually do you one better, because there's actually a lot of studies that show that there may not be a correlation between torn rotator cuffs and pain. If you were to grab a handful of people from the public and sample them and take a look at their rotator cuffs, you would find that about 1 in 4 of them have a partially or fully torn rotator cuff, but are not in pain and may not even show that many symptoms. Should we then conclude that rotator cuff tears are not a big deal and you really shouldn't worry about them? No, that wouldn't really make any sense. What about the NCAA basketball player who fractured his neck in the middle of a basketball game and then continued to play the rest of the game and having no idea that he had fractured his neck until the next day? Should we then conclude that fractured necks are not a big deal? People in the military who get shot and don't notice it and just fight through the entire battle and never realizing that they're in pain and they're bleeding out. Maybe bullet holes are not that big of a deal, because if they're not in pain, then, who cares? Point of all of this is that pain is weird. We don't understand pain. It's an extremely complicated and strange thing. We understand aspects of it. We understand that it is part sensation, it is part perception. We understand that there is a underlying utilitarian value, like it is your body trying to communicate with you that something is wrong. You can get into all kinds of trouble if you lose your ability to feel pain. So pain in many respects is a good thing. We also know that some people's perception of pain can be worsened by their psychological state, like depression. But we also know that lots of people will just push through the pain if they think they have to, like I did when I was diagnosed with a herniated disc. We know that some people will overreport pain, and we know that some people will underreport pain. We know that pain is adaptable, meaning that some pain just disappears, kind of like the smell of your cats or your dogs or the sound of the refrigerator. But we don't really understand pain. So basically, to do all of this and call it like hard science is ridiculous. You're just essentially stacking weak sauce on top of weak sauce. Even if this is true, and I don't think it is true, I think that I think posture does play a role in pain, and I can explain more later. But the idea that this is a mountain of evidence because you didn't find evidence of a correlation of pain and posture is not sound hard science. You wanted to have hard science that could convince somebody like me. What you would need is the ability to measure and predict. So in other words, you would need to say something along the lines of, if your neck has this degree of extension for this period of time, we would expect this degree of atrophy from the antagonist muscles and this degree of inflammation in the active muscles, and we would expect this degree of some kind of pain index, which we will probably not have for a very long time because of the various factors that I talked about when it comes to pain. Like I said, a lack of evidence is not evidence. Now, before I move on from this, I really want to make something clear. Science and people's interpretation of science is already so muddled and confusing in modern day culture that I don't want people to just walk away thinking that, because there isn't evidence for something, that you can just do whatever the hell you want. That's just not how it works. What it means is this. So, contrary to popular belief, science does not beat reason. Reason beats science. Hold your guttural reaction. I am not saying that your individual ability to reason beats another person's science. I am not saying that people's altogether ability to reason beats science altogether. What I'm saying is this. Conceptually speaking, if you were to make a Venn diagram, science would be under the category of reason. It is a form of reason. For example, the sister of science could be like math, or you could even say common lexicon. What I'm using right now is a form of reasoning. But there are various different forms of reasoning. Science is just one of them. Science is a cognitive tool. It is the process by which you observe nature, you gather information, you develop a hypothesis, and you test that hypothesis with the goal of gaining the ability to measure and predict an outcome. In the absence of evidence, you must default to reason. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. So, for example, there is no evidence at this time that cracking your knuckles is bad for you. Does that mean it is okay to crack your knuckles? Well, in this case, yes, because there is a lack of evidence that cracking your knuckles is bad for you, and there's no reason against it. Nobody can think of a solid reason against cracking your knuckles. We don't have information that would indicate that there's a reason to not crack your knuckles. Then yes, it would make sense then that you should be allowed to crack your knuckles. Another example would be aspartame. There is currently no evidence that aspartame is bad for you. So does that mean it is okay to drink aspartame? Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, if you're comparing it to sugar, we actually have a lot of evidence that sugar is bad for you, and that has a compounding interest effect on you, and it can hurt you in a lot of different ways. So in comparison to sugar, yes, it makes sense to consume aspartame since there's no evidence that that will hurt you, but there is evidence that the consumption of sugar over time will hurt you. I'm not saying that because there is no evidence that you can just do willy-nilly. What I'm saying is you must default to reason. And in this case, he's saying that there is no evidence of the correlation between posture and pain. Well, if you can think of a reason for why it would still be important to fix your posture, then you should still fix your posture. Let's say he's right. Let's say that posture has no bearing on your pain. I don't agree with that, but let's just say he's right. Could there be another reason? And the answer is, yeah, gravity does not care if you're in pain or not. There are no buildings that are screaming in agony. There's no cars that are like going to, see a therapist because of the amount of pain they're in. Gravity is the great equalizer. It does not care if you're in pain or not. It will still crush you. And if you have muscle imbalances like you see in a poor posture, then it is going to accelerate the effects of gravity on you. And you will see earlier failure in your joints and in your body as a whole than you need to. So in the absence of evidence, then you have to default to, well, there's still gravity. And there are other reasons that I'm going to get to later, but at a bare minimum, you would think that these guys would know, like, yeah, this doesn't really make a difference because posture is how you fight gravity over a prolonged period of time. And if technique matters when you're deadlifting, when you're squatting, if technique matters when you're combating gravity in a condensed period of time, why would technique not matter when you're fighting gravity over a prolonged period of time? And remember, the effects of gravity are cumulative, right? Buildings don't collapse because of one day gravity just got stronger. It's because of the cumulative stress on whatever weak point there is in that system that just attacks and attacks and attacks relentlessly 24/7 until it eventually breaks the weakest point in that system. So if you are, squatting 300 pounds and you're obsessed with the technique that you have when you're squatting, well, guess what? The cumulative stress of gravity over the course of your lifetime is going to actually equate to magnitudes of orders more force than what you are fighting in that brief duration of squatting 300 pounds. So it doesn't really make sense to obsess over a concentrated dosage of gravity, but not worry about technique over a prolonged dosage of gravity. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And like I said, I'm not asking you to change your logic or use your logic any differently. I'm asking you to use the exact same logic that you would use for anything else. So, and to his point, to argue against this point here, in the absence of evidence, you must default to reason. Does that make sense to you? Do you think that, yeah, your human body is not some magical place where gravity turns off? You still have to fight gravity. You still have to worry about muscle imbalances and bad movement patterns in order to be able to properly fight gravity over a prolonged period of time and prevent early failure. Whew! Okay, let's get back into this video here.
This is probably the most potentially harmful myth of them all, because there's good evidence that if you think there's something wrong with your posture, that belief can create or worsen pain that you otherwise might not notice. This is called the Nocebo Effect, and it's similar to the placebo effect.
Real quick, I'm gonna get more into this, but one thing I gotta say is I'm just getting so tired of the placebo-nocebo effect bullshit. Look, the placebo effect is real. The nocebo effect is real. What I'm getting frustrated with is it seems to me that anytime the medical community can't figure something out, the non-scientific, non-hoity-toity, non-academic field appears to figure something out, then essentially they just chalk it up to a placebo. Classic example would be water, right? People, there's no evidence that you should drink more water, right? That your body can regulate your hydration, no problem. Well, and then you get a bunch of people that start drinking more water and they're like, I feel great. Nah, that's a placebo. Nah, you don't know what you're talking about. In my case, hanging upside down, right? So I had a herniated disc. I would hang upside down. Medical community says there's no evidence that hanging upside down helps with your back pain. That's weird because it does help with my back pain. Oh no, that's a placebo. If you say it enough, if you say nocebo, placebo enough, it eventually starts to feel like exactly that. It just seems like you don't know what's going on, and so you're just saying that it's a placebo. But I just get so frustrated by this just constant really that's weird because it feels like it works. No, it's just a placebo. And then of course later in the future when they do find evidence for it, like for whatever, the pump, for bodybuilders was the pump, or the mind muscle connection, the scientific community will eventually catch up, and then they pretend like they like they kind of knew all along or whatever. Maybe I'm being stupid. I wouldn't even call that necessarily critical thinking or anything like that. Honestly, if you want to scrub that from your memory, that's fine. But I just get so annoyed by the constant, people have way overused the concept of the placebo effect. I don't think it makes up anywhere near the percentage of scenarios that the scientific community acts like it does.
Fine, because like I said, the link between posture and pain isn't very strong, to say the least. This was shown in a 2018 study where there was no association between so-called text neck, where you tilt your head down to look at your phone, and neck pain in 150 young adults. No association. Yet a lot of the internet seems to be really worried about this. A more recent study published in 2020 once again found that text neck was not associated with prevalence of neck pain frequency.
Really quickly, I just have to point out this little level evidence 4. About half of the studies that he's showing here are in that category. When you see level evidence 4, that might seem like it's a lot. It's actually the exact opposite, because the scale goes from 5 to 1 being the highest, like a pyramid. Level 4 is just the tier above expert opinion. So this quote-unquote mountain of evidence that he has, and he's acting like this is all like hard science, like this is all like they figured it all out. About half of these are literally just better than expert opinions.
And a systematic review combining the results of 10 studies found moderate evidence of no relationship in thoracic kyphosis, or upper back rounding, between groups with and without shoulder pain. Now, to be fair, you can find studies that show a correlation between posture and pain, but it usually isn't present in the highest quality studies.
And there you go. So this is where it gets even more manipulative. He's basically just doing the thinking for you. He's not presenting an even argument or anything like that. So what he just said was, there is evidence against his hypothesis or this thesis of this video here. But it's not very high quality, and don't worry about it. Once again, I find it so frustrating and manipulative that he does admit that there is evidence against his argument, but he doesn't show it, and he just basically says that, none of that makes any sense.
No doubt some of you still feel pain because of the postural stresses imposed by your job. For example, my dad worked as a dental hygienist for 30 years and would feel back pain quite often from the bent over positions that he'd need to be in. So I wanted to ask the experts about common cases like this. How do you square that circle? It's like you say, okay, well, posture and pain may not be that related, but then you have someone come and say, well, I work at a grocery store and my back's freaking killing me, so what's up?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a good example there is if you ask anybody to hold a bag for a very long duration of time, their bicep's going to get lit up. But if it's your job to hold that bag for 8 hours a day, your bicep is going to get lit up every single day on a very regular basis, but you probably not think anything crazy of it. But it seems to be that there's just certain body parts, such as our back, our neck, where we really start to freak out about these things. There's a whole book from one of the leading individuals on pain, Stabbed in the Back, and he talks all about how we have this weird perception of the back. If you do almost any sort of other activity and you have a lot of muscle soreness, you often don't freak out. But when it comes to the spine, people are very concerned. In the case of that person that's working on the bottom shelf a lot, maybe they need to take more frequent breaks, they need to stand, they need to walk, they might need to actually go and do deadlifts, improve their capacity of their lower back, so that way when they go and do that stuff on the bottom shelf, it's not as challenging.
Right.
That's where we do see a lot of individuals that regularly do resistance training often have a lot less general aches and pains in the research body. It could be for a lot of different reasons, but one of which is theorized that because they have a general greater capacity at different muscular tissues, they can often handle more daily tasks easier.
In a certain sense, what he's saying is the quote-unquote back-breaking labor thing isn't real, right? That there is no period of time in which you can spend in a flex position in which you will start to experience pain, or that it will compromise your ability to fight gravity over a prolonged period of time. First thing I'm just going to say, just throwaway side note, I just find it so annoying that because one guy wrote a book that says, like, I think it's dumb that we freak about back pain, that, like, the rest of us are just supposed to not freak out about back pain. I just think that's very silly, and I don't really understand that, because back pain is a very big deal, although I do understand what they're talking about. Let me kind of break this down a little bit. As long as I am doing videos for Critical Fitness, I will always preach the importance of body awareness. And this kind of scenario that he's referring to is pretty much one of the biggest reasons why. It sounds patronizing and all that, but you really do not have a good relationship with your body. If you're not using your body, if you're not exercising, if you're not playing sports, if you're not really active, you probably have a very, very poor relationship with your body and understanding what your body is trying to communicate with you. If you just start making a conscientious effort to improve your body awareness, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. There is levels to this stuff. There's levels where there's you, and then there would be me, and then like way above there'd be like Wim Hof, and he's like controlling his heart rate and all this stuff. You can develop infinitely, right? But one of the biggest functional values that you get from body awareness is learning the different types of pain and understanding what kind of pain you can push through and what kind of pain you can't push through. And this is a huge part of the reason why I'm so anti this toxic workout culture of just no pain, no gain, push through it or whatever. And like you get all these people, they get off the couch, they go to their New Year's resolution, they get some idiot trainer who just screams at them and pushes them harder and harder and harder. They get injured and then they're right back out the couch by the end of January, right? So this is one of the biggest reasons why I encourage just making a conscientious effort to develop your body awareness. I know exactly what he's referring to. I know exactly what he's talking about with this sensation of back pain that not necessarily actually doing damage to your body, but you kind of freak out. And basically what they're talking about is the back pump. There have been many a times, like years ago, where I would have like a wicked back workout, you know, doing back extensions, deadlifts, whatever, and it would feel like my back was paralyzed, and I thought for sure I fucked my back up. I thought for sure that I was done for and that, my legs were gonna go numb, and then the next day I would come up and be like, wow, my back feels amazing. And really what it came down to was, like I said, body awareness. I didn't really understand the difference between like a back pump and actual nerve pain, actual like pinching a nerve or anything like that. Any kind of pain that would come from like a muscle strain, like my hip flexor or my psoas, that type of thing. And to be honest with you, I'm still learning this stuff. I only recently realized how big of a role my psoas was playing in my back pain. So like I said, it's a never-ending journey, and you can only learn these things by making a conscientious effort. So on one hand, I totally understand what he's talking about, how a lot of times people will misunderstand their pain, but it isn't necessarily, that doesn't mean that you should just not listen to your body. It's actually the exact opposite. It's because you don't listen to your body, and so you have a poor relationship with it, and you don't know where you can push through and when you should stop. I would say, once again, this goes back to my previous point about how, muscles develop, and temporary short-term inefficiencies. If you sacrifice short-term inefficiencies for the sake of long-term efficiency, this is exactly what I'm talking about, right? Fixing your posture, in this case, he's not saying fixing your posture, but he's saying that, you're going to have back pain if those muscles are weak. Well, I would say the exact same thing. I would say, yes, if your posterior chain is weak, you're going to experience more back pain. And one of the best signs that you have a weak posterior chain is if you have rounded shoulders and it's a long period of time in this flex position. You don't see too many people with crazy strong backs and crazy strong posterior chains that also spend all day in this position. Most people, if they've got a very strong posterior chain, those muscles are firing off all the time. And of course, their back is extended, their thoracic spine is extended, their rotator cuff is pulling their shoulders back. That's how most people with strong backs stand. Call me crazy, but I would say that's more evidence for why you should be working on your posture.
Other factors like sleep enormously as well.
If we've kind of had the conversation about sleep, workload management, all those things, then it's really just as simple as setting a reminder on the phone and saying, okay, you know what? If you have to sit for this long, what I want you to do is every time your phone blinks, shift your weight to the right or shift your weight to the left, or put a little box.
Or get up and move.
Under your chair and prop one foot up on it, and then switch feet and prop the other foot up. Stick a towel roll under your back and then take it out. So at some point you're arching, some points you're slouching. If you are forced to have your head down on it,
or get up and move.
You'd probably be better off, like you mentioned, doing resistance training. Probably for the vast majority of people who have neck pain, doing a nice clean row is going to have more return than all of these weird little drills.
I vehemently agree with this. This is probably the only part of the video that I very, very strongly agree with. Look, modern problems demand modern solutions. We spend 80% of our time in a flex position. We don't engage our glutes. We don't engage our posterior chain. This is not a gym channel. Critical fitness is not about going to the gym. But you will see me always talking about weightlifting and gym a lot because weightlifting represents a unique opportunity to go in there and surgically attack your muscle imbalances. If you have weak glutes, you can do hip thrusts until your glutes catch up. If you have a weak posterior chain, if you have weak rhomboids and all that, you can start doing face pulls. You can start doing, any of the exercises he recommends. I mean, you can do these things. And also, athletes want aggressive results. You use your body aggressively, so you want aggressive results. And so, yeah, I completely agree with this.
And if you fixed your pain, then I think that's great. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that research shows that 75 to 80% of pain improves within 4 to 12 weeks on its own. So you probably could have done just about anything and the pain would have gone away. Then if you add in the placebo effect, where you really believe the drills you're doing are working, then it's not surprising that you'd credit them for your results.
Just think that that is so strange and silly. First and foremost, just think about this like, I don't know, game theory or whatever, as an individual. So they tell you that your pain is going to go away in 7 to 14 weeks. How do you know that? How do you know that, right? So how do you know you're in the 75%, if this is true, by the way, of the 75% and not in the 25%, right? How do you know that you don't have a condition that is going to get worse and if you don't attack that problem? It's all obviously anecdotal, but I've heard lots and lots of different case studies of people who, had a problem, they didn't, work on it, they didn't get the attention that they need, and so of course that problem just got worse because they just kept pushing through it. I don't understand this idea of like, oh, don't worry, there's a 75% chance that it's not going to go away. Well, there's a 25% chance that you're going to make it a lot worse. 1 in 4 is really not that great. You are responsible for your own body. So if it's a small ache or it's a small pain, I guess that could kind of make sense, but you really got to understand like your own body. You have to increase your own body awareness. But even if that is what it is, that it just goes away. Like I said, we don't understand pain. I mean, how do we know that like most of these people's pain isn't just going away because they're adapting to the pain or they stopped reporting the pain or that the pain has more or less like moved into, their subliminal or something like that, which I would argue. And I'm going to explain more in a moment here, right? I mean, did my pain go away over the course of 7 weeks? I guess you could argue yes, because I wasn't really focusing on it per se. Like my back pain and my sciatic pain, it would spike up every now and then. For the most part, I just kind of learned to deal with it. So if you told me, don't worry, there's a 75% chance that the pain's going to go away, you could technically have been right because like, yeah, I guess the pain kind of did diminish or go away. But it wasn't because I solved the problem or that my body resolved the problem. It was because I just sort of dealt with it. I just sort of like ignored the pain and just pushed through it and, took NSAIDs and just lived my life because that's what most people do. That doesn't negate that there is a real problem here. And to just say like, yeah, well, your pain's probably just going to go away. It is so much more complicated than that. And we don't have enough of an understanding of pain in order to be able to make those kind of judgments.
Ask a nice bit. A lot of people on the internet would tell me that I need to get my shoulders back and sit more upright. Do I? Like, should I be worried about that at all? Like, I don't have any real pain or I suppose my lower back gets a little tired, but then I'll just stand up for a bit, crack my back, and then sit back down again, and I'm fine. Should I be cognizant of the fact that I'm slouching, and should I make an effort to sit up more upright?
I'd make a strong argument you should not be. Very consistently, we see that individuals who hyper-focus on their posture are more likely to catastrophize, are more likely to be fear avoidant, are more likely to have pain, whether it's acute or more persistent pain. And so just by the general act of being less concerned with it and naturally moving and changing postures, you're probably in a good position.
So what he just said, they kind of smooth over real quick, but I kind of got to explain what he's talking about because it's very, very complicated. So what he's talking about is, people catastrophizing their pain. Now, I do not work in the medical industry, okay? I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but I understand that apparently this is a real problem in the medical community and in the medical industry. Basically, it's patients who make way too big of a deal of their scenario, of their pain, and put on these huge performances about their pain. It clogs up the medical system, it clogs up their time, and it uses a lot of time that a doctor like Dr. Spinelli here could be using on somebody who's probably underreporting their pain or just generally needs more attention, like really does need more attention and more testing or whatever. You can kind of see the underlying motivation for this video from his standpoint is he might be trying to help this problem that he has of people coming to him that are taking up way too much time, and this is time he'd rather be using on patients that he thinks really need it. Like I said, I don't work in medicine. I work in tech support. Now, you might think that tech support, medicine, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And in terms of knowledge base, that is true. But the relationship between the provider and the customer or patient, there's actually a lot of overlap. And that is because tech support, doctors, and car mechanics, all three suffer from the same phenomenon. It's called information asymmetry. It's basically just a fancy economics term, which means that one party knows a lot more about a given field than the opposing party. And it creates all of these different game theory / psychological barriers that you need to overcome. The biggest one would be suspicion and basically lack of trust. The classic example would be you take your car to the mechanic for your yearly inspection, and then they call you and say, hey, the doohickey connected to the Nimrod bullshit, whatever, is not working anymore, and it's going to cost you another $800. Well, you don't really know anything about cars, and so you might be angry. You might try and push them a little bit and get some answers out of them. You might try and take it to a different car mechanic. But basically, you are at a disadvantage, right? You don't know a lot about cars, and they do. And so you don't know if they're just holding you hostage and trying to squeeze out more money out of you. Well, that same property actually exists in all three. From a game theory standpoint, it actually makes a lot of sense. What he's talking about here is, the patient comes in, they have a perceived problem, and so they go to him. They are maybe making a much bigger deal of their problem than is actually real. Well, there's an actual logical reason why they might do this, and it's because a patient might go to a doctor and explain their problem and not get the response that they were looking for, and they think that the doctor, maybe they're not taking it seriously or anything like that. Which also makes sense from the standpoint of, let's be honest, the medical community has a rich history of denying people's pain. Doctors basically just ignore people, tell them that they're being hysterical, not take them seriously, and then it turns out that the people were right. Factoring that in, you can imagine that a patient sees a doctor, they tell them, I have bad back pain, I have something, and they don't get the response that they want. So what do? They put on this whole performance and go, no, you don't understand, and they make it a really big deal. What they're actually doing is essentially just talking past the sale. So in other words, they gave you a certain information and they got this response, and what they wanted was this response. So what they're doing is they're basically putting on this catastrophization performance to try and get this response. So basically catch you up to the response that they were expecting, because they understand that you know a lot more about this, but you might be busy, you might not really care, you might not be a great doctor. It's important to understand that there are reasons why people do this other than just being hysterical and silly. There's another thing to consider, which is that for every patient that catastrophizes their pain, there are other patients that underplay their pain. And so to just blanketly tell people to not to catastrophize their pain, even if in theory that did work, that the patients that are making too big of a deal of their pain, even if that did work, and then it could also have the unintended side effect of getting people who already underplay their pain and already wait too long to go to the doctor, that they're going to wait even longer. I mean, you already know that this is a real thing. You already know what I'm talking about. There's all kinds of people who have old guys that have a stroke and think that they're going to tough it out and just try and walk through it. Or Lord knows, men will do crazy things because of wanting to be tough or whatever weird psychological thing that, we oftentimes have. So to just blanketly tell everybody, stop catastrophizing your pain, Well, you're basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to now tell people who underreport their pain and that they should underreport their pain even more. There's an even bigger problem, which is this. So, like I said, the problem here is information asymmetry. Therefore, the solution is to alleviate the information asymmetry. Now, to his credit, Dr. Spinelli, there's an accompanying video with this that is the podcast form. He sort of gets into this. He sort of talks about how people should be doing more research and whatnot. So you would think that if somebody's catastrophizing their pain, the intuitive answer would be that you should just tell them to not catastrophize their pain. But counterintuitively, the answer is probably the exact opposite, because again, the problem here is information asymmetry. Let me use myself as an example with tech support. I will get people here who come in who basically have what we call acquired knowledge versus I have working knowledge, meaning that they went and Googled their problem. They Googled their tech problem and they found some forum that said, whatever, some shenanigans is happening to my computer, it's happening to my phone. Almost 100% of the time, when you Google your problem, you will find a real situation that is real. They come in because their computer is doing something and they read somewhere that somebody else had this problem, and so that's it. This is the catastrophic issue that they're having with their computer. They are technically right. It is absolutely possible that whatever cockamamie situation they read on the internet is real. It absolutely could be real. But I have working knowledge. And the difference between acquired knowledge and working knowledge is that if you have acquired knowledge, you do not have a good sense of proportion or probability. If you have working knowledge, you work in probability, right? You are seeing the same problems over and over again. You're seeing the same 5-6 different things over and over again. And so you know that, like, yes, there is a possibility that the weird cockamamie issue that you saw on Google could be real, but because I have working knowledge, I know that the odds are like 99% that it's not the issue that you think that it is. And by the way, before we move on, I just want to say that acquired knowledge and working knowledge are actually even. I don't want you to think that working knowledge beats acquired knowledge. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, but I just want you to understand like how that works. The solution to this is not to tell people, don't Google your problems, right? You would think that I would say, don't Google your tech support problems. Don't Google your thing, right? It's actually the exact opposite. It's Google more. The reason why people come with these weird catastrophic issues or catastrophize their pain is because they just stopped at WebMD. They searched and they saw WebMD and it says, oh, my thumb is pulsating. Maybe I have cancer because WebMD sucks. It's stupid. And so they just see the first thing, and so then they have a panic attack and they freak out, right? Well, the answer to that is Google more, right? Check YouTube videos, check physical therapy videos. Dr. Spinelli gives the suggestion of Googling red flags or looking, do you have nerve pain, that type of thing. The solution counterintuitively is not to just blanketly tell people to not catastrophize their pain. The solution is to tell people to take more ownership of their body, take more responsibility, and increase your body awareness. Don't just stop at WebMD. Don't just stop at Google. Keep searching. And then, of course, also understand that, like, this doctor's time that you're going to see is valuable, and they could be potentially being better used to help people who have the exact opposite problem, that are underreporting their pain. I guess what I'm saying is that I completely disagree with what he's saying about not catastrophizing your pain, but I think I understand the underlying motivation, and I understand the problem, and I understand why somebody would come to the conclusion that they're coming to. But what I'm saying is that if you just use a little bit of basic game theory, economic theory, just human to human theory, I guess, you'll see that counterintuitively, the solution is not to just tell people to, stop making a big deal about your pain. The solution is really the exact opposite.
Conversation with Dr. Spinelli is out now on my podcast, so you can listen to that on my podcast.
Okay, so quick, that's a quick wrap up and everything. Now I'm going to get into, the actual reasons for why you should fix your posture. So like I said, in the absence of evidence, you have to default to reason. So what would be some of the reasons for why it is important to build and maintain proper posture? Well, the biggest one, like I said earlier, is gravity. So what do I mean when I say gravity? I'm not asking you to think differently about your body than you would about anything else. If it is important to have good technique when you're fighting gravity, when you're deadlifting, then it is far more important to have good technique when you're dealing with the cumulative stresses of a lifetime of gravity, because that will actually compound to be greater. But let me just actually explain what we're talking about. When I say the compound effect, when I say that your body is like a 401k or it's like a negative interest like a credit card, what am I talking about here? What am I talking about when dealing with gravity? Well, really, like I said, it's no different than anything else. It's if you look at a tower, right? If you look at a skyscraper, where is the stress of gravity being distributed? Well, in a perfectly vertical tower, it's relatively evenly distributed across the body. Now, if you took that same tower and you added an extra part of it that had a ledge and a bunch of weight on top of that, where would the stress point be? Well, it would be in the joint that is holding that extension. Your body is no different. If you hold your neck outwards, away from the baseline of your body, then where are you distributing the stress of gravity? Well, you're putting it right here in your neck in these tiny little muscles here. This is no different than anything else. You know, the branches are weaker than the trunk of the tree. If you're playing soccer, if you're playing basketball, if you're playing any sports, everybody knows that the highest probability of you getting an injury is when you're at full extension. And when you fully extend your leg, when you fully extend your arm, I'm not asking you to think any differently than you would for anything else. If you are extending your neck, if you are extending your shoulders, you are putting yourself in a vulnerable position. Just like, eating ice cream, right? Eating ice cream is not going to make you obese. So holding yourself in a bad posture for a short period of time is not going to permanently mess you up. But just like ice cream or pizza or any of these other things, if you lack discipline, eventually the compound effect will kick in and it's going to start to get worse and worse, and it's going to be more and more difficult to fight. So what's the compound effect when we're talking about the human body here? Well, you assume your body resumes. If you assume this position of the pronated, flex position, what's going to happen? Well, you are actively engaging all of the muscles here in your front half. You don't really notice that you're actually engaging these muscles here, but you are. When it comes to the body, you are really just a man riding the elephant. You don't really know all of the things that are going on in your body. Your body is doing most of the legwork. Your body is beating your heart, it's breathing for you, it's digesting for you, and it's doing most of the work when it comes to moving your body and all that. You really don't have a whole lot of play when it comes to this stuff. When you are in this position, you don't realize that your muscles are actually engaging, right? So this would be like a passive engagement. These muscles are firing off, whether you realize it or not. And what's happening is that as these muscles contract, they're getting tighter and tighter and tighter and stronger and stronger. And the muscles in your back are getting weaker and longer and longer and longer. This is where the compound effect starts to kick in. Like I said, a short period of time, if you hold that position for a couple of hours a week or so, yeah, I guess you can get away with it, just like you can get away with, a slice of pizza or something like that. But if it happens enough, then eventually you will pay the price for it. You will experience that negative interest, and it will get worse and worse. So how does this relate to gravity? So in the case of the human body, if you are in that flex position, then the cumulative stress is going to continue to pull you down more and more into that flexed position. And this is exactly what we see when you look at old people and walkers and older people with hunchbacks. Essentially, that is just a lifetime of gravity. It's just a lifetime of a muscle imbalance that was never really tackled. And just as time goes on, in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s, it just got even more difficult. Now is the time to invest in your body. Now is the time to invest in those muscles in your back and pull your shoulder back, because those muscles are going to be very, very important later for a variety of different reasons. So structurally, it is much less sound to have your body in this extended compromised position. And if you don't believe me, just look at head carrying. When you see people in the world that carry large weights above their head, we're talking 50, 60, 70 pounds, you will almost never see them in this extended position. Why? Because why would you? That would be extremely painful. I mean, just imagine if I asked you to hold 50 pounds of weight on your head with your neck pushed out in this extended position. That would be agonizing. Your neck might even be in pain right now just of the thought of it, which is why you almost never see that. When you look at these people, practicing head carrying throughout the world, you will almost always see them with their head just above their chest and their shoulders, where they're going to have the absolute strongest position where they can fight gravity over a prolonged period of time in a perfectly vertical position. So you might be thinking, okay, Antonio, fine. I just won't carry 70 pounds of stuff on my head. Well, actually, it's worse than that. The human head only weighs about 8 to 10 pounds. But remember, The effects of gravity are cumulative. So in reality, although you're not carrying 70 pounds on your head every day, you're actually experiencing a cumulative effect of gravity, which will, by the end of your life, be magnitudes of orders greater than even just spending a full day with 70 pounds on your head. Now, so far I've only talked about like structural integrity, right? But what about, strength and mobility? What roles does this posture that you adapt play in that? Well, there's a bunch of different things. The shoulder joint is technically a ball and a socket joint. To explain what I'm talking about, it's easier to start with the hip joint. The hip joint is just a real nice, clean ball and socket joint. That socket is a lot deeper than it is in the shoulder. And so although you can dislocate your hip and whatnot, it's typically more rare, it's typically more difficult. You can have all kinds of different problems, but it's not as easy as it can be with the shoulder joint. And that's because in the shoulder joint, you have a ball and socket, but the socket is very shallow. This is why a lot of times people like to equate it to a golf ball on a golf tee. The reason why we have this is most likely because for our species, we needed greater accuracy and we needed greater mobility. So we needed a more shallow and potentially less stable system so that we could throw spears or, do whatever we needed to do, tens, 20,000 years ago. So to compensate for this, we have ligaments and muscles that help keep our humerus in that shallow socket. So when you think of a golf ball in a tee, if you needed to apply force to that golf ball, but you also needed the golf ball to stay in the tee, where would you put the force? Well, you would try to push the force into the golf ball in such a manner that it would go directly into the golf ball tee. Any variation in change of that force increases the likelihood that the golf ball is going to pop out of the golf tee. And that's basically a very simplistic way of explaining how the shoulder joint works in terms of injury and whatnot. You really, really want a constant force pulling that shoulder joint into that shallow golf tee socket. And any degree of variation, any degree that you change that force is going to increase the probability of a variety of different shoulder injuries. Now, when we talk about rotator cuff tears, there's a couple of different ways this can happen. The rotator cuff is 4 different muscles, but one of the ways that you can strain your rotator cuff is essentially because you have your shoulders in this rounded position. And remember, like I said, you assume your body resumes. So if you're spending all day in this position and then you go to do a bench press or overhead press or any type of shoulder movement, throwing a baseball or something like that, and you are resuming this position, you're going to put a lot of strain on that rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is going to be getting stretched out every day, and it's going to be basically trying to pull your shoulder. It's just trying to pull together. Now, you can do that for a long period of time, but like I said, you are increasing the probability of an injury. And one of the ways that can happen is that if you are already extending your rotator cuff and you extend it very rapidly in a short period of time, then essentially you can experience like a micro tear or a micro trauma, where essentially that muscle it's already trying to hold, it's already trying to pull, and then you just like max it out really quickly, and it creates all these different micro tears. If you do that long enough and you get enough micro tears over a prolonged period of time, eventually you will start to experience what they call tendinitis, which is essentially when you're kind of stuck in a little bit of a vicious cycle where you just keep causing micro tears and you're causing inflammation. Oftentimes that inflammation will trigger, maybe other muscles around it are getting triggered, and because of the inflammation of the impacted muscle, maybe you start to compensate. Maybe you don't use that muscle because tendinitis is making that muscle weaker, and so you are compensating with another muscle, and now that muscle is getting inflamed. You can get all kinds of trouble, even just by having a consistent supply of little micro traumas, not even getting into like a full length tear or anything like that. But that would be like for an example of like a exertion, non-contact injury. What about like a contact injury? Well, you're definitely weaker in this position, and if you take a lateral impact in this position, then it's going to push your shoulder inwards even more. Now, going back to the golf ball tee analogy, like I said, any degree of variation in the direction of force that's going to hit that golf ball is going to increase the likelihood that the golf ball gets knocked out of the tee. And the same thing is true with your humerus, with your shoulder joint. Now, to compensate for this very shallow socket that we have all kinds of different ligaments that are there to basically hold it together and almost act as if it was a deeper socket. It doesn't fully compensate for having bone, because obviously bone will always be stronger than ligaments. But the idea here is that these ligaments are going to be tougher than muscle, but they're going to also be more flexible than bone so that we can try and have the best of both worlds. When you assume this rounded shoulder position, if you take a lateral impact here, you're going to push the rounded shoulder even further. Basically, when you take an impact laterally like this, you're putting a tremendous amount of stress on really either side of your shoulder joint. You'd be putting it inwards and tear this side of the ligaments that are holding your shoulder together. Or you could twist it that you actually start to put pressure on the ligaments on the back side. Essentially what's happening is that you have an overextended shoulder, and so you're just basically pushing that shoulder forwards even more than it was intended to be. And now remember, health is not binary, it is probabilistic, meaning that, I have relatively good posture. That doesn't mean that I can't take a lateral impact and tear my labrum or tear, any ligaments or tendons in my shoulder. There is definitely going to be a degree of an impact that somebody like me will still experience ligament tears and things like that. The difference is just probability. So I'm not saying that if you have rounded shoulders, you are guaranteed to have an injury via contact or exertion, just that you are always increasing the probability. And of course, if you get really aggressive with, doing more shoulder movements, doing more flexion movements, more chest movements, you're just compounding this effect and you're just increasing the probability of an injury. Now that's just injury. Let's talk about the mechanical disadvantages that you are put at when you assume the position of the flexed rounded shoulder position. Now, at some point in time, you might have thought, why do I need muscles in my back that pull horizontally and or downwards to help me push things forwards or hold things in front of me? That seems a little bit counterintuitive, right? Well, actually, it's very intuitive once you start thinking about the body as a series of levers. Just imagine that you have a balance, of two different weights, seesaw, and the weights are perfectly even. Now imagine that you move them to one direction. Well, everybody knows that the long side is going to have more torque, and so of course it's just going to immediately fall over. So of course, to compensate for that, if you wanted it to still be balanced, you would need to put a lot more weight on the shorter side in order to maintain that. You would need to be able to generate more torque on that short side. Your body is the exact same way. When you are holding your arm forward, in order to compensate for the weight and the imbalance that you're creating with this, 15, 20 pounds of muscle that you have here, you need to have muscles on the back that can pull downwards and create torque to pull you downwards so that you don't, fall over and or that your arm doesn't just completely fall over or that your shoulder doesn't round inwards. You don't have to just believe me. You can do an experiment with me right now. If you have access to a weight, 5 pounds, something like that, just hold that weight in front of you. What you will notice as you do this is you will almost immediately notice that there is a great deal of exhaustion in this muscle right here, your deltoid, your shoulder. And that makes sense, right? This is a deltoid workout. This is what you would do if you wanted to strengthen this group of muscles. But eventually you will start to notice that you're getting exhausted in your back, specifically around your shoulder blade. And that's because your rhomboids are pulling those muscles, pulling your shoulder back so that you can maintain this position. What do I mean by that? Well, your muscles don't pull in one direction. They pull in two directions. Your deltoid doesn't care that there's weight on one side. It just knows to contract, meaning that it's just pulling in two different directions at the same time as hard as it possibly can. So if I'm holding a weight here, it is pulling on this weight as much as it is on my body. It's pulling them both together at the exact same time. Now, if I didn't have any back muscles, what would happen is that my shoulder would just collapse inwards, right? Because it doesn't know. The deltoid has no idea that there's muscles in the back or if it needs muscles. It just knows to pull two areas together. That's it. So if I'm holding this weight and I have no muscles in my back to hold my shoulder back into this position, then my shoulder will get pulled inwards because that's exactly what the deltoid does. It's pulling equal force on both sides. So hopefully you're starting to see some of the problems that you can have from having that weak posterior chain. If you didn't have any muscles in your back, essentially your arms would just constantly be falling forward. Your shoulders would just be constantly falling forward. So interestingly enough, there's a lot of people that go to the gym and they just train chest and shoulders all the time and they never train their posterior chain, or they just don't take their posterior chain very seriously. And then what will typically happen is that they're going to hit a wall, they're going to hit a plateau, and they're not going to get any further. It's basically they've hit the limit to what kind of force their body can mechanically produce based off of that position. You can imagine how, like I said, this muscle is indiscriminate. It's pulling from both directions. If I put this in a lower position, then it can only raise so high. If I put it in a higher position by, engaging the muscles in my back, then of course it can engage those even higher. This is why you will always hear me talking about scapular strength, scapular stability, and you probably won't hear just me talking about it. Most people who preach fitness, functional fitness, or your health span and all that, they're going to constantly talk about scapular stability, because the muscles in your back are essentially the muscles that allow the muscles on your front to work at all. So if you only pay attention to these muscles and if you only develop these muscles, you're going to hit a wall and they're not going to get any further until you balance out your body and allow those to have the mechanical advantage that they were originally intended to have. But that's just strength. What about mobility? Well, quite frankly, that's probably the easiest one to explain. And like I said, you don't have to just take my word for it. You can just follow along with me. Assume this flexed rounded position with your neck forward and in this rounded position. Now just raise your hand as high as you possibly can, right? If you're like most people, can't really get much higher than this. Now, if you wanted to do an overhead, you would need to extend your thoracic spine here, and then you can reach full range of motion. And of course, if you go even further, you can put your arm back even farther. I'm not sure I have to do much explaining for that. I think that's a pretty obvious one. Anybody can replicate that, and they actually flat out admit this in the video. But I would again, of course, argue that you assume your body resumes. It's going to be a lot more difficult to get into those positions and to maintain proper mobility if your body is being trained to hunch forward and hunch and round your shoulders inwards. Now, these are all things that Jeff Nippards knows. There's no way he doesn't know that. These are all things that Dr. Spinelli knows. If he doesn't know that, that would be very, very embarrassing. I doubt that he does not know that. They all know that, because this is more of just like the basic fundamentals that any personal trainer would know. So yeah, I don't understand how they don't include any of this. They don't consider the long-term effects that it's going to have on your training, on your mobility. Now, what I wouldn't necessarily expect them to consider is some of the other aspects that posture affects. Look, when we're talking about the human body, quite frankly, you might as well be talking about quantum physics. The human body is just insanely complicated. And one of the biggest things that I don't think everybody understands is that when you're talking about changing one thing in the body, it will almost inevitably change something else. This system is very dynamic, but it is very intertwined. Everything affects everything. So once again, I have to go back to my original point. In the absence of evidence, you must default to reason. So let me give you an additional reason besides for gravity for why you should improve your posture. And it's a very, very big one. It's called breathing. You'll notice not just rich people typically have good posture. There are other classes of people that have great posture. And that would be speakers, people who speak in front of large groups of people, opera singers, Broadway singers, most athletes. Most people who do a lot of heavy breathing typically have good posture. Why do you think that is? Well, because when you assume the flexed rounded position, you put a lot of downward pressure on your diaphragm and you limit its range of motion. But you don't have to just take my word for it. Once again, join me and do a little experiment with your own body here. Flex your body downwards, push your shoulders in and create this flex position. Now take a deep breath and go ahead and exhale. Now do the opposite. Assume good posture. Arch your thoracic spine, squeeze your shoulder blades together, push your chest up, rotate your ribs, make sure that your neck is stacked on top. Now take a deep breath and exhale. Chances are you probably noticed there is a very, very big difference in the way you breathe between those two positions. But it actually gets a little bit worse than that, because when you are in this position and you arch your neck forwards, you're actually mimicking some of the effects of snoring and sleep apnea. When you extend your neck outwards in this position, you're putting your jaw in a somewhat recessed position, and this can encourage the muscles in your jaw to atrophy, and what will happen over time is it will encourage mouth breathing.
I was tripped by this mouth breather, Troy, okay? Mouth breather? Yeah, a dumb person.
Now, mouth breathing is a kind of a big deal for adults, but it is a way, way, way bigger deal for children. You really do not want children to develop mouth breathing, and you really do not want them to develop in this neck extended position. The reason for that is this: if children develop in this extended neck position, one of the very common things that can happen is that they will hit critical stages in which the muscles in their jaws will not develop. And if they don't develop, then essentially their jaw will recess and they will start to breathe through their mouth. It's kind of a sad, messed up thing, but there is actually this weird, scary truth to the, idiot mouth breather thing. Now, people thought it was the exact opposite. People thought that you're an idiot, therefore you breathe with your mouth. It's really, unfortunately, the opposite. It's mouth breathing causes a much lower supply of oxygen to your brain and therefore causes brain damage. This is also one of the more common reasons why children will oftentimes need braces and or jaw surgery to push their jaw forward. So, like I said, it's a pretty big deal for adults, but it's a very, very, very big deal for children. If you have children, try to make sure that they develop with proper posture, lower the probability of mouth breathing and brain damage that can be associated with that. But we're not done just yet because, like I said, the body is very complicated and everything affects everything. You see, your diaphragm is not just in charge of breathing. It has a couple different other roles, like, for example, the tonality of your voice, which I'm going to speak to in just a moment. But they've also recently discovered that your diaphragm plays a role in your digestion. When you breathe, you're lifting almost your entire digestive tract with it. It's really weird and creepy, and I totally understand if you don't want to look at it, because it's definitely a weird thing to look at. But essentially, your diaphragm plays a role in massaging your intestines to assist in the digestive process. So if you assume the rounded position over a prolonged period of time, you are limiting the range of motion of that diaphragm, which then, of course, hinders its ability to assist you with digestion and, of course, leads to more indigestion. Yeah, the body is a very, very complicated thing, and it's very silly and shallow to think that just because of one component, like pain, that you can just throw the baby out with the bathwater, that you can just forget about posture and its importance and forget about gravity and all of that. And if I could chalk up this video in one word, that's exactly what it would be. It would just be shallow. I think this is all a very, very shallow thought process, and it just really lacks an understanding of science. It lacks an understanding of the human body, and I think it just lacks an understanding of, basic physics, right? Like the compounding effect and the accumulative stress of gravity. Now, those are all the physiological aspects of it. Briefly touched up on was the psychological aspects and the social aspects of it. They talked about it being classism and about how they think that it's all just classism. I don't think that it is all just classism. I think that classism plays a role, but I think that aesthetics also play a role. When we talk about aesthetics, right, what we're talking about is, the same things that you see these bodybuilders doing. They're holding a position that makes their chest look bigger. It makes them look like their waist is more narrow. In the case of women, it makes their boobs look bigger. It makes their waist look more narrow. But really, when we talk about aesthetics and just trying to be attractive, one thing people mistakenly believe is that, and trying to look attractive is all completely arbitrary. In reality, what most of the stuff that we do to look more attractive is that we're trying to create the picture of health. Whether it's real or not, it could be photoshopped, but it doesn't matter. We're trying to create the picture of health. So you can get boob jobs, liposuction, Botox, steroids. It doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, although all of those things are fake, they are still pointing to the same thing, which is you're trying to create this image that you are actually physically healthy. And this just makes perfect sense from an evolutionary standpoint. All animals want to try and succeed and breed with other members of their species that appear to be successful. Now, once you realize all of the different benefits that good posture has, it's really not difficult to understand why that would be deemed more attractive. Like I said, there is no sport that I've ever encountered that was not aided by having better posture. Even swimming. This is one of the things that absolutely blew my mind, is that when you are swimming, they encourage you to stick your chest out and arch your back. And the reason is because it makes it easier for you to pick your head up above the water. Every sport I've ever come in contact with, I have yet to find one that encourages you to round your shoulders. Almost every single sport that I have seen, they tell you to arch your back and arch your back and push your chest up. And one of the most common ones would be long distance running, because if you're running 25 miles or more, you need to be very efficient in your breathing, which means that you need to give the maximum passage. You need as much volume in this air passage in your throat, and you need as much range of motion in your diaphragm as you can. And so typically you'll notice that long distance runners have excellent posture. Also, like I said, having better posture or holding your shoulders in this position will give you more range of motion. So it's really not difficult to imagine that, for example, let's say, a woman attracted to a man 20,000 years ago, they're probably going to be looking for a male. There's a good chance that we were persistent hunters that chased down our prey by just mercilessly chasing them, running. We have more stamina than any other land animal on the planet. We can just run and run and run. We have the most efficient breathing system for long distance running. We can run in conditions that almost no other animal can run. And so you can imagine, a male that is really good at hunting, and so they run and they run and they run, and they've got great range of motion and accuracy, so they nail their target and they bring food home back to the tribe. And you can imagine how women would be more attracted to that person. Quite frankly, I think that is a far more rational explanation as to why we would deem that to be physically attractive. It probably just has thousands of years of inertia from, people looking for mates that look like they can efficiently breathe and efficiently run long distances, so that when they're in dangerous scenarios, they can escape and basically just encourage the likelihood of their species survival. I mean, that's evolution in a nutshell. But there's more to it than that. Like I said, your diaphragm has a role in how your voice sounds. And one of the things that people think about when you think about being attractive is confidence, especially for men. Now, people have this idea that confidence is purely just a behavior, or it's the way that you stand. Those are all true, but one of the major components for confidence is the way you sound. I always encourage people to speak at the lowest register that you can comfortably speak at. And there's a reason for that. When you speak at the lowest register that you comfortably can, it sounds like you're confident, and it sounds like you know what you're talking about, and you're not really questioning, you're not nervous, you're not scared of anything. When you speak at the highest register that you comfortably can, it sounds like you're really unsure of yourself, and you're worried, and you're scared, and somebody's going to come hurt you right now. The explanation for this is actually probably also pretty simple. You notice that if you take a deep breath and you breathe, your voice is going to sound a lot deeper, and that's because the bass comes from your diaphragm. The bass comes from your chest. And so when you're taking those big, deep breaths, it seems like you are in control of the situation. You're not afraid at all. You're relaxed. You're taking big, deep breaths. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It doesn't matter if they, somebody's, I don't care. I don't care what you can do with that pineapple. That's cool. That's weird. I wouldn't do that, but I'm not afraid, right? I'm not afraid of what you're about to do to that pineapple. It doesn't sound like I'm nervous at all. Versus when people are afraid, they start taking shallow breaths, they start to panic, and then he pulled, and then he took the pineapple, and then he slowly cut the top off, and people sound like they're scared and like they don't know what's going on, right? So what we perceive to be confidence, people think confidence is, all these different things like how assured you are and all of this different stuff. And those are factors. But really, probably the biggest factor in confidence is just that you're not afraid. What we think of when we think of a silverback, we think of not being afraid of really any situation. And that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about confidence and being attractive via confidence, is you just don't have that nervous energy. You're not afraid of, the future or whatever may come, versus when people have like a higher pitched voice, it sounds like they're taking shallow breaths and they're scared and they're talking really quickly. And you can feel the vibration. If you talk like this right now, let's just go ahead and do it with me. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P. You can feel that vibration in your throat versus that deeper vibration that comes from your chest. So, like I said, everything affects everything. The body is a very, very complicated system. And so when you are speaking with this extended back position, it helps with that, taking deep breaths so that you can have that comfortable deep register of your voice so you sound confident and you appear more attractive. Now, before we wrap all this up, I have to talk about correlation between pain and posture. I don't really care if they currently don't have evidence that there is a correlation. One thing I always like to tell people is that there's no such thing as being anti-science, but everyone in some way, shape, or form is anti-scientist. And if you don't believe me, just ask scientists. Because you cannot have a successful career as a scientist without disagreeing with some other scientist. You're going to have to step on somebody's toes, and you're going to have to point flaws in somebody else's argument and or their, scientific research. So it is totally okay. We, for some reason, we have a very mutilated concept about science in modern day culture where, people are anti-science or people are pro-science. And just in general, the conversations that we have about science in modern culture and especially in America are just really unhealthy and just we don't really do it right. And one of the things that I find so interesting, there are people that we would argue are quote unquote anti-science. Like I said, nobody's actually anti-science, but if you're a flat earther, if you're an anti-vaxxer, there's a couple different, healthy at any size, if there's a couple different other avenues in which people are more or less, they're fighting the entire scientific consensus. And that would be, there are reasons for it. You could argue that there are logical reasons for it. But yeah, that would be, quote unquote, I guess as close to anti-science as I think you can get. Interestingly enough, though, people who are in the, hell yeah, I love science, or the crazy pro-science people can oftentimes actually have a pretty poor understanding of science as well. There's a lot of these science enthusiasts that, like I said, basically they think that science trumps reason, and so they will oftentimes forego reason for the sake of science. There's a couple different problems with this. In this case, you have somebody like Jeff Nippards who refers to himself as, the evidence-based bodybuilding, muscle development community. Now, I am not anti-evidence-based, at least not yet, but I am noticing that the term evidence-based is increasingly becoming watered down to the point where it's kind of like gourmet. Like once gourmet hamburgers showed up, the party was over. Gourmet French fries and all the stupid stuff that we've termed gourmet. And you could just imagine them being like, what happened? Like, how did this happen? And really what it comes down to is it comes down from a lack of discipline in how we use our terminology. Nobody calls each other out. Nobody exercises discipline in how they use the terminology. In the fitness world, this is a really big problem. You see things like toxins, fat burners, and things like that. All of this comes down to a lack of definition. One thing you'll hear me say all the time is definition is everything. And it comes down to a lack of discipline. And in the case of the evidence-based community, there are lots of people that are actually evidence-based, but increasingly getting to the point where, it's becoming like toxins and things like that, where, it doesn't actually mean anything anymore. Don't be surprised if in the next 5 to 10 years, you start to roll your eyes when you hear somebody call themselves evidence-based, just like you probably roll your eyes when you think of reflexology and all kinds of stuff. There's not discipline. If we don't have a certain degree of, gatekeeping, as messed up as it sounds, if we don't have a certain degree of discipline about how we use our terminology, then essentially it will get blown wide open and then it won't really mean anything anymore. And this video, I think, represents exactly what I'm talking about, where this idea of it being evidence-based and the evidence that they're presenting is that they did not find any evidence. There was a time when you could say that there is no evidence that washing your hands before surgery is important. You can do a tremendous amount of damage when you don't use your critical thinking skills and just use what you perceive to be evidence-based. If you basically just turn your brain off and just go, well, this scientist says that there's no evidence, therefore I just do whatever. If you don't use the other factors or the other components in your knowledge base, then you can get into a lot of trouble and you can do a lot of damage. And this is exactly what I'm talking about here. Like I said, I don't care if they have 8 studies that show that they couldn't find a correlation between pain and posture. It's going to take a lot more than not finding a correlation. Like I said, you're going to need hard science. You're going to need a pain index. You're going to need a measurement system for pain. You're going to need to learn a lot more about pain. And then you're going to need to understand the, measure and predict. You're going to need to have understanding the underlying mechanisms of posture, the wear and tear that it can cause due to gravity. When should we expect a certain degree of wear and tear, and when should we expect a certain degree of pain? So if you want to convince somebody like me, threshold of proof is a lot higher than just not finding a correlation. One thing I like to tell people all the time is you're really, really not supposed to declaw your cats. hang in there. This is going to make sense in a moment. If you declaw your cats, cat claws are not like fingernails. If you declaw them, you're going to sever the nerves in their paws. You know what? I'm going to grab my cat because he's right there. Why don't I whore out my cat? If I was to declaw my 15-pound chunky boy here, he would not be a normal happy kitty cat anymore. He would not be a healthy happy kitty cat. And this cat, he's relatively cuddly. He's relatively friendly. My other cat's a lot more. But if I was to declaw him, he would go straight into all of the stereotypes that everybody hates about cats. He would be aloof. He would be mean. A lot of the stuff that we attribute to the negative side of cats comes from just the history of declawing them. When you sever their claws, you doom them to a life of pain, and it changes their personality. Now, of course, cats are not sentient, so they are not really aware of why their personality changed. They don't really have the ability to cognitively realize, oh, I'm being meaner and I'm being angrier because I'm in pain. They just react off of instinct. And so, yeah, if you declaw your cat, you're essentially going to have a mean, angry cat for the rest of your life. We humans really are not any different. We like to think that we are because, yeah, we're smarter than cats in a lot of ways. In some ways, we are not. I strongly believe that a lot of people basically move their pain to what we would call the subliminal, which I understand is a garbage, non-scientific term. I understand that. But there is something to this. There is something there. I mean, what else is the whole massage industry based off of, right? You go for a massage, and I'm a huge believer in massage and massage therapy. One of the biggest reasons why is you go to the massage, and if you get a real good massage therapist, they're gonna find tension in your body that you did not have. And I don't mean some bullshit reflexology, some weird kooky, toxin fighting massage therapist. I mean like a sports massage therapist, like a real licensed massage therapist. If you get a real massage therapist and they get in there, they're gonna find all kinds of tension in your body that you didn't know that you had. Now, if this research is correct, then what is that? What is the tension that you find, like, for example, in your back and in your lower back? What is this tension that is building up? And why does it suddenly feel so good when the tension is released? I would argue that we are oftentimes like declawed cats, that we are in pain and we don't really fully accept and or realize it. Sometimes it's like how I was, where I just pushed through the pain and I didn't really consider how it was affecting me. And then some people just flat out adapt to the pain and don't really realize it. I know exactly what they're talking about when they say, if you point out people's bad posture, suddenly they'll start reacting like they're in pain. This happens to me all the time. I'll have a large group of people that I'll be talking to about posture, and it's more effective than yawning. It's more contagious than yawning. If I even mention the word posture, and to a crowd of people, everyone will start shifting their posture. A good chunk of them, maybe 30, 40, 50% of them, will start to rub their shoulders and they'll start to complain about shoulder pain and, oh, why do my shoulders hurt? Now, their argument would be that it's the nocebo and that it's just all psychosomatic and that they're just basically causing pain out of nowhere and they're basically hysterical. My argument would be the exact opposite. My argument would be that the pain was always there. I'm just calling attention to it, that they've essentially moved it out of the way because they can't focus on it all day. They need to get back to their life. And of course, this makes sense. This is how soldiers can get shot and continue to fight. Your body, the whole reason why pain appears to exist is to basically ensure your survival. And if it means that, it's trying to communicate, hey, you need to react to this pain that you have, then you need to treat that. But if you have another circumstance where, you're moving, you keep pushing forward, it would make sense that your body needs to be able to turn off the pain because it thinks that you have something more important to do in order to survive. So in this modern day setting where, we're not, getting bit by alligators or whatever, how we get into this position is we just continue to ignore the pain. And this pain affects your decision making. And I'm not just making this up. There is research that shows this. People with chronic pain have poor decision quality. They're more upset. They're more anxious. And they're more angry at their spouses. I'm going to be posting some of this evidence in the little description below. I would like to actually use myself as an example here because, this is going to get kind of deep and personal. And I'm not going to go as deep as I would like to. But a long time ago, back in 2013, I had a full-on mental breakdown. We're talking like the full 9 yards, having to get committed and all of this stuff. And I'm not gonna go all that deep into why this happened and all of that, because I'm going to actually do a video about mental health and about my mental health journey and all of that. But for today, for this episode, what I want to explain to you is this. I could have gone the route of the therapy and psychiatrics and taking medicine, but I chose not to do that. Like I said, you are responsible for your body, so I don't want to hear anybody coming to me saying that just because I decided to not take psychiatric pills or anything like that, that you immediately jumped off of psychiatric pills. You need to take responsibility for your own body, and you need to listen to your own body and think about your own situation. But for me, I decided that I wasn't going to take psychiatric pills to treat what I was diagnosed with at the time, which was bipolar. Now, at the time, anybody who knew me would have thought, like, yeah, I have bipolar. Everybody thought I was absolutely crazy. I definitely showed the crazy manic symptoms and the crazy depressive symptoms. It was pretty obvious to most of the people who knew me that, yeah, there was definitely something wrong. These days, I've managed to tackle it pretty much on my own through various different methods. But one of the biggest ones was through my body and eliminating a lot of the pain that I had in my body. Like I said, the pain that I had was so bad that I was crying in my dorm bedroom, just laying down and crying because, there were points where the pain would come in so sharp and so intensely that, all you can think about is this the rest of my life? Is the rest of my life going to be this? Am I going to just exist in a state of pain forever? And then you move on. You just push it down again. You just move the pain and you just get back into your life. Because if you think you have to, that's what you're going to do. And so what happened for me was, as I started to piece myself together, one of the biggest contributing factors to my, psychological instability was that I realized that pain was probably one of the biggest contributing factors, if not maybe 50% of the contributing factors. Pain can be a constant. It's kind of like if you had, going back to the personal finance metaphor, imagine if you had a ridiculous constant payment. Maybe it's a payday loan or some kind of massive credit card payment. If you have a constant that you were constantly paying, and then another stressor comes into your life, then it's stacked on top of that. Another way you could think about it would be like gain, like turning up the gain. If the bottom threshold of your lifestyle is just you're always in pain, and then another stressor comes in, you're just cranking up that gain. So the constant of pain is being raised, and then the new stressors that you're adding, be it whatever, somebody dies, your girlfriend broke up with you or something like that, you're just adding stressors on top of those constants. And if you have poor decision quality because of this, and you put yourself into positions that give you even more stress, even more anxiety, you basically get stuck in this vicious cycle. I'm not going to sit here and say that pain was the only problem that I had, but it was a really, really big problem. And I would say that for me, eliminating the pain in my life, or at least as much pain as I could, did not make me per se happy, but it has made me a lot more content. And I think that is something that I really tried to preach and teach people is don't aim for per se happiness, aim to be content. And what content is, for me at least, it appeared to be just taking out detriments. When you can alleviate a lot of detriments, financial stress, physical stress, social life stress, when you alleviate all of these different detriments, what you are left with is contentness. Happiness is a temporary sensation. It's dancing at a wedding. It's all of these different things. And I don't want to get too deep into all of this, but the point of what I'm saying is that one of the biggest detriments in your life is just a constant state of pain. And it can absolutely change the way that you behave and the way you think about yourself. And for me, what it really came down to was that my back pain had slowly but surely triggered a compounding negative interest effect. And it started to affect almost every single part of my body. The herniated disc led to sciatica, which led to a limp. It led to anterior pelvic tilt, which led to, an extremely strained, a very severely strained hip flexor, which I'm only even now just starting to tackle with. Pain and inflammation radiated upwards into my back, and it created inflammation in my thoracic spine, which then limited the range of motion of my left shoulder here, which is still causing problems in my shoulder to this day, even after years of fighting it. But the point of what I'm saying is that bad movement patterns, poor movement patterns are a compounding negative interest. And posture is part of this, right? How you hold your body over a prolonged period of time will have a compounding interest rate, either positive or negative. This is one of the biggest reasons why years and years ago I started tackling my posture, because I realized, I am experiencing shoulder pain. Like the reason why, there's this myth of you hold stress in your shoulders. That's just a myth. The reason why that happens is that when you have shoulders, your shoulders are pronated like this, there's only really one group of muscles that can help suspend your shoulders in this position, and that is your traps. Your traps are big, powerful muscles that are designed for stamina, but even they have a breaking point, and eventually they start to get exhausted, and they start to basically scream at you, please stop, please change your position, stop holding in this position. Now, because of this myth that people think that they're holding their stress in their shoulders, you feel that and you think, it's psychological. It's just stress, when in reality, it's the exact opposite. It's you are stressed because you have held the wrong position for a long period of time, and so then your body is creating this tension and now stressing you out. I could obviously go on and on and on, and I will in my mental health video that I'm going to be doing one day. But you could see why something like this would be a very, very big deal for me, and why I would get so furiated that this video that I think is highly irresponsible, 400,000 people or more are going to watch this video. And if even 1% of them are fully convinced by this video, that means thousands and thousands of people are going to forsake their posture. They're going to forsake how they fight gravity. They're going to forsake their movement patterns. And if they think that they have pain that is just being catastrophized and that, they just need to keep pushing through it, there is a reasonable chance that a certain percentage of them are going to end up like me, and they're going to end up having, a complete mental breakdown. I'm not saying all of them, obviously, because there's, it's multifactorial. There's a bunch of different reasons why I had a breakdown, but it's a major factor. And so, I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say taking down a video, but if I was to say you should take down a video, this would be one of them. It is not a good idea to tell thousands and thousands of people that you are just catastrophizing your pain, that it's really not a big deal, that it's going to go away in 7 to 14 weeks, and that it doesn't matter how you fight gravity, that your movement patterns don't really matter. This is all honestly just utter nonsense, and you don't really have to just take my word for it. I mean, like he said, the internet at large seems to believe this. Well, there's a reason why. It's because this is the common consensus. It's because it affects how you fight gravity. Technique matters when you're fighting gravity. It affects how you breathe. It affects your range of motion and your strength. It affects the probability of an injury. And it affects your movement patterns over a prolonged period of time. So, like I said, if I was to describe this video with one word, it would be shallow. If I had a second word, I would actually probably say that this video is dangerous and or, maybe harmful, because absolute best case scenario, let's just talk about best case scenario for his video, is that maybe it's not that big of a deal, right? That's basically his argument, is maybe posture's not that big of a deal. That's best case scenario. Worst case scenario, he's totally wrong, and he's just convinced thousands of people to delay their progression and to delay development of their posture so that they can start correcting those movement patterns. Again, hugely irresponsible. I still respect Jeff. I still, I don't know anything about this Dr. Spinelli guy. Maybe he's got lots of other great content. I don't really know, but this particular video and this particular piece of content, really, really irresponsible. And I just felt really compelled to just try and rip into it. So folks, like I said, never turn your brain off, right? What do you think about what I'm saying? Do you think I'm making a compelling argument? Do you think that that I am thinking critically, or that this is good critical thinking? Do you think that Jeff Nippards' video is, as I stated, void of critical thinking? What are some points that I may have missed? What are points that you might even want to add to my argument? What are some other factors? Go ahead and leave a comment. if you like this, if you found value in this content, I would really appreciate if you head to my store and grab some gear. This is a clothing brand that I'm trying to market by giving information, by motivating people to, tackle pain and tackle their health. So if you want to support me, the best way to support me is to grab some clothing from my website. Like I said, I've got this always moving shirt. This shirt is one of my favorite shirts for a variety of different reasons, but one of the biggest ones is, like I said, you should always be moving. If rather than just sitting in one position and then sacrificing your posture, get up and move. Get up and keep, do some stretches. If you work at home, get a standing desk, balance on one foot, balance on the other foot, change, move around, change, the way that you're standing, change the positions of your feet and whatnot, but just always be moving. And when you have this always moving shirt, and for me, when I wear my always moving shirt, I can tell you I move a lot more. It's really weird, but basically I'm wearing my mantra. I'm wearing something that just reminds me to just move more and just stay more active. And it really does work. When I wear this shirt, I probably move 25% more than I would otherwise. I love wearing this shirt for that reason. But if you don't want this shirt, I've got all kinds of stuff. I've got all different kinds of shirts, some that just say critical. I've got Grab Life by the Bells. I've got Team Thick. I've got Unlimited Willpower. And I'm always adding new stuff. So that's the absolute best way to support me if you want to support this clothing brand and support my content. But if you can't, if you're broke, then that's okay. You can totally support me by liking this video and sharing it with somebody. I would really, really appreciate if you could spread the word, spread this content, give it to somebody that you think could use this video, or give it to somebody that you think can't use this video. I don't care. I don't know. Just send it to people. It doesn't really matter. But if you really want to support me, that's the best way to do it. Thank you for watching.